Seeking life-changing knowledge? You stepped into the right place. Welcome to Bold Perspectives with Samantha Postman. In every episode, discover, explore, and grow your personal or professional self with real and relevant knowledge to help you improve your own life and make a positive impact in the world around you. Tune in for honest insights, life advice, inspirational wisdom, and the occasional salty rants. Because you are meant to live a better and bolder life.
Welcome, everyone. I'm really glad you're here. This is the Bold Perspectives podcast, and I'm Samantha Postman. Today, we're going to talk about how I responded to a question I got from someone lately, and he wanted to know how he could do it all in his lifetime. Sounds like a valid question. And what came out of it kind of surprised me. So stay tuned so that you can gain some of those life advice and insights that I shared with someone on my LinkedIn recently. Full disclosure, this is my very first full episode recording, and so you are going to hear some choppy spots along the way. And if you're joining me on my YouTube, you will see some areas where there's a timestamp, and then all of a sudden, no timestamp. Partway through, I realized that the timestamp was like on the actual video, but re-recording didn't really make a lot of sense. So, you know what? We all learn through in the process. We've got to start somewhere. And I know that all of you have been in the same spot as me at some point where you're learning something and you're hoping that those who are watching, in my case, maybe thousands of people, that we'll all be a little gracious with one another. So we'll get to the show. Today, we're going to talk about a recent encounter I had with someone through my LinkedIn messages. And it actually got me to think outside the box and caught me off guard. So it's pretty normal for me to get messages randomly through my LinkedIn. Often they're kind of cold outreaches, just trying to drum up some business by others. And so, I find them interesting, the way people will start them. And we all got to start somewhere, right? So anyway, what happened is somebody reached out to me that I didn't know, wasn't part of my network, so kind of caught me off guard. I wasn't sure how they kind of got in touch with me. And this is how the message started. It said, "Hey Samantha, how's business treating you?" That's it. Didn't, right away try to sell me a product. It didn't sound like a robot. It definitely sounded like something a little personal. But wasn't too elaborate. So I responded back. I was pretty busy at the time. I thought it was a cold message, cold call. And so I was like, actually, I co-run a farm right now and it's kind of crazy right here. So it's kind of like my way of letting him know I'm a little busy right now. And now's not a good time to be like chatting up on LinkedIn. And he responded, I see that. Obviously, I checked my LinkedIn profile and looked it over carefully. And then he's like, "Hey, I noticed you're also the CEO of Smart Arrow, and co-owning a farm sounds kind of hectic." And then started just asking me questions like, "What does your farm mostly produce?" And not a generic response either. So there's a human being behind it and some warmth to it. So anyway, I was feeling a little cheeky that day. So I responded back and I'm like, "Oh my, I think my young adult kids are more hectic." Laugh out loud. And they need a lot of guidance while figuring out how to adult. On the farm side, we grow mixed grains, oilseeds, and pulses. And he responded a few days later back with, "Hey, Samantha," again, personal message, and the exclamation mark. I actually kind of like that. And he's like, "Hey, not trying to sell you anything, but I've been looking at connecting with more people in 2020, and LinkedIn seems to be the new best way, haha. So I'm hoping to learn more about what people do so I can refer business their way and vice versa. Would you be free for a 15-minute call sometime next week?" So, this guy intrigued me. I loved how he gently pursued. This was over 6 days, couple of small, tight little messages, responded with a little bit of, with some humanism to it, and didn't push me right away. Usually when I get a cold message, it's like right off the bat, I get, trying to sell me something. But he took 6 days to do a light pitch. But I know how networking goes. So he sounded really fascinating to me. So I'm like, sure, connect with me on Tuesday to get a time of day. And I gave him my number. And so he responded with, hey, Samantha, no problem at all. Let's connect tomorrow and find a way to make it work. And so this was a fascinating conversation. I think the 15-minute call turned into, I don't know, it was like 45 minutes or something. It was quite a while. And this guy's really fascinating. Young guy, super eager, hungry, running multiple businesses. He is working in the finance world. And because of my tax background, we definitely could connect on quite a few levels. He's got a new startup company, which I find kind of a new way of doing finance advising. And I find it very fascinating. So when we started the conversation, like normal conversations, kind of asked a bit about each other. What do you do for business? What got you in it? Why do you love it? Where do you see it going? And he kind of did the same thing with me. And, it's interesting because he started just asking me some questions like, I'm trying to figure this out, this part of it. And, do you have any advice for that? And so right away, it was kind of this organic mentoring session. And I found that even fascinating. He was he's teachable, had some value and some intellectual engagement there. And so, we chatted for quite a while. I won't go into all of what we talked about. It was mostly more kind of a cross between, business and mentoring. And then by accident, to be honest. And at the end of the conversation, he's like, I don't know if you're up for this, but I'd love to have another call with you. Would that be okay with you? And I'm like, sweet, this was really great, fit it into my day, do it from home. Normally kind of do something organic like this at a coffee shop. And then at the end, which is really the purpose for the show today, is I asked him a question and I said, out of all the people to reach out to, like, what drew you to my profile? Like, how did you get connected with me specifically? And what motivated you to reach out? And he goes, well, to be honest, why I really connected, one of the reasons I did connect with you is because I read your profile and I was like, dang, how did she do so much in one lifetime? And so he's like, man, this is someone I want to learn from and I want to ask some questions from because she must know how it's done. And oh my gosh, I was so taken. That caught me off guard, to be honest. Was not expecting that at all. Wasn't even remotely where my brain was sitting at the time. And so I didn't know how to respond. We were at the end of the conversation, the end of our time, and I kind of just sort of laughed it off, like, how we do, and we're not quite sure how to respond to an unexpected question. I kind of laughed it off, and I'm like, well, kind of, doesn't everyone do it this way? And he's like, no, they don't. And anyway, I'm like, well, he's like, we could talk about it the next time we talk. And we set a meeting up for 2 weeks later on a Friday during his lunch break. And good time for me because Fridays I don't like to do a lot of brain work. I like to do mentoring type stuff, usually mid-Friday. And so we hung up and that question just bore on me. So I started thinking about it and I'm like, this question requires quite a bit more thought on my part. And it's a good question. Like, did I do it differently? Do I have something to offer? He thinks I do. And so I went about, I went onto my LinkedIn and I just started writing back. I'm like, hey, here's my message. I'll read it off to you. So you'll see that I'm reading off the screen here. Or for those of you who are watching this. And I responded like this. It was really nice to connect with someone as knowledgeable as you. And I miss connecting with business-minded people like I used to in an office. There's so much value in hearing other people's passion and how to help people live better lives like he's doing. And so I told him right away, I love how you do two things. One, I love how you help people with their finances so they can live their best life now and in the future. And something else that I love about him, and I noticed from our conversation, is I love how he helps people find jobs so that they can help others provide services and products while providing for themselves in a meaningful way. So this young, eager guy's got a couple of businesses on the go. So he's got his finance advising company, and then he also has a company where he does virtual assistant placements. And so he helps virtual assistants overseas mostly find really good fits in locally for businesses who are looking to outsource and get some really good help. Mostly his virtual assistants have some finance training. So anyways, really great. And I personally help people find jobs quite a bit. So I thought this was really noble of him. I guess in a way I sort of said that was noble about me, but I guess we like things in others that we like about ourselves and vice versa. So I wrote that at 7:00 at night. And then an hour later, my brain is still going. And I said to myself, so I wrote again. He's probably like, what's with this lady? But, I felt motivated. And so this is what I wrote. That he intrigued me so much that I checked out the websites that he had referred to for his businesses. And, this is harvest time, by the way. So I'm like crazy busy. And for me to take the time to do that is kind of a big deal. So one of my responsibilities during farm season is to make sure that the harvest workers have meals ready, hot meals ready for the suppers. So after I wrote this in the email, and I said, yeah, I actually checked out your websites after getting the meal harvest out. And then I just started thinking about what he did again. Those are two really important areas to serve people, finance and helping them find jobs. And so I said to him again, thank you for dedicating your life to helping people through businesses. And then I wrote, during our conversation, you asked, how do you do it all? And then I apologized. I'm like, I have to apologize for not responding well then. And to be honest, I shared something personal. The reason, I guess part of the reason why I was having difficulty explaining that, other than the fact that it kind of surprised me, is so here he's saying I've done it all and he wants to be like me and trying to figure out how he can, incorporate some of the things I've done. And I shared with him very shortly this personal bit about how my parents had recently expressed that I wasn't meeting their needs. My dad at the time was dying of cancer and they needed more help. Farm season's really busy for me and for us. And so I was even less available to kind of be there for them. And so I know that they needed help and it was just done for a cry for help, but I just was feeling very inadequate at the time. So isn't that how it is? Somebody will call out something they see in us that they like, and it's the very time we feel the most inadequate about it. And so, I'm part of the sandwich generation too. So I kind of feel like doing it all is almost impossible because we've got this, my older generation of parents to take care of, and then my young adult children who just still need a lot of kind of mentoring, I guess. And so I'm definitely not feeling like I'm doing it all very well. And then I said to him, upon reflection, I'd like a retake on that question. I'd like a retake on the how do I do it all? If it's okay with you. And I'm like, you had a genuine question that desired a bit more thought. And so I began to write 3 things that came to mind as I cleaned up supper about what I could offer him in this time and where I was at that time. And so that's what I'm going to share with you is those 3 ways that I felt that I could offer advice to him about how I did it all. So the first tip that I put on this messaging, which is actually really like a life hack, was this one, and it's lavish love and support on your partner. This person will get you through anything. We'll take primary on parenting when you need to focus elsewhere, and we'll even type out your presentation notes when you're on a time crunch. I've been married for 26 years, and since I was raised by pretty much a rebel teenage mom, being married this long and having 3 well-balanced young adult children is probably the biggest accomplishment of my lifetime. And I've since started thinking about that a little bit more, and ways that played out was part of our conversation that we had later, and I shared, it was in the personal conversation that we had later, I shared a little bit about how I had gotten really sick. In 2009, I was honestly pretty much in the prime of my life. My business was with multiple businesses at the time. I was learning about 10 different hobbies. I was into photography, doing some professional photography at the time. Well, I guess our main bit was still farming. And then I also ran a tax consultancy, because in my first lifetime, I was a tax expert. And then I was on like multiple committees at the school. I was on education committee. I was spearing up a brand new tuition assistance committee to help parents with getting their kids into this great school we have in our city. And then all of a sudden, like literally out of nowhere, within weeks, I was completely incapacitated. I was in crazy pain all the time. I wasn't even able to cut like food. So here, going from practically Wonder Woman, I guess, to not being able to cut food for myself. We were just going into the harvest season at the time. And you have no idea how devastating this is for an, at the time, overachiever. And so I pretty much lost everything. This is the short Cliff Note version. I lost everything other than the farm business. I even now have a really hard time doing photography for any length of time because of the damage that I have. Turned out that I ended up with an autoimmune disorder that pretty much took me down. I mean, I spent months in a wheelchair. I'm from Canada, and after a year and a half of pretty much incapacitation, and I'm being very gentle today because it's really hard for me to go into that space. So if you'll just have some grace with me there, that even after a year and a half of trying to seek medical treatment and what to do, eventually the Canadian government actually paid for me to go to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. And so then we were kind of able to get a little bit of movement from there once I was able to get diagnosed properly. And, to be honest, that was like it was the hardest time in my life. And I've been through some really, really tough stuff. And, before that time in our marriage, we'd already been married for 15 years. And the whole lavish love and support on your partner part definitely played a big role when it was time for me to be really loved on. And I'm not saying that he wasn't doing that earlier. However, these times are when you don't know they're going to come in the future. And I'm telling you that hardship and trauma, like hardship is going to come. It's just part of being human. And so it's like putting all these investments, and I'm going to use investment language just because I'm thinking about my friend who's into investments. And it's like this, what we call in return on investment, or return on your energy, if that's what it takes. So if that's the easier way for you to think about it. And so like I invested time in our marriage, I invested time in my partner. And when it came to needing help, he was there. Like he took primary on the parenting. Our children were all in elementary at the time. They were at that age where they were like fighting a lot, and they weren't able to even cook a meal. They weren't old enough to cook meals yet. And so in a farm, that's pretty serious when your wife can't cook the meals and you've got young children. And I just wasn't even able to handle them in general. I mean, I spent most of my time in bed, unable to like even process people talking practically. Which I know when you're looking at me now is really hard to see that. And maybe someday I'll share a little bit about my journey for the last 11 years about how I went from wheelchair Samantha back to this. But I'm not at full capacity anymore. That was my long way of going around like your investments, they're worth it. We don't do something to get something in return. We do it because at the time it's the right thing to do. And I lavished love and support on my partner because it was the right thing to do. And because I loved him and I knew, and to be honest, sometimes I didn't always like him. I'm pretty sure he didn't always like me. We'll probably both admit that. That's how marriage is. And yet, even when I didn't feel like it, I still lavished love and support. Because when you physically do something, even if you don't emotionally feel that way, it just resurges. Mostly that's often what happens. So when you act caring, you just are caring, or the feelings of caring return back to you. So that was just a little side tip I added to the podcast today. And then I'm just going to make a little light of something. So a little while ago, fast forward all these years, we're not going to go into go into like the sad part of why you want to invest in somebody. But like from a business perspective, I mean, I was into this new project and I was in way over my head. Still, I've got young adult children at the time, so they're kind of busy in a mental way, which you might be surprised how much that can take from you when you're like trying to do a new project, because they kind of require you to like intellectually engage. And so I wasn't over my head with just family and business. And I had a big presentation due the next day, and I had done a ton of brainstorming, handwritten. Sometimes I do this what I call free thinking. When I've got a project on the go and I have an iPad Pro, and it has a pen and it's just like a piece of paper. And I just like think, I just like write. And during that process, I came up with some really good points. But it takes I needed to like get some of them typed out, and I did not have time for this. So I'm like just kind of getting all the meeting organized and getting my presentation ready. And so here it is, like late at night. He's like, "Hon, what can I do to help?" And I'm like, "Can you type out my handwritten notes from the other day?" And okay, so he's not really like, I'm not that he can't type, but he's not a typer. He's not like a secretary. And he's just like, "I can do that for you." And so sure enough, he goes on the computer and does his like, I'm going to show it on here, kind of like his little pecking, like typing thing. And oh man, he did it. He typed out my notes for me, and you have no idea how much that really helped. I was able to get my presentation ready on time, and not feel like I was going to stay up to 4:00 in the morning and then be so dragged out for my presentation the next day. And these are just places like, sometimes it's when it's down and we're broken, and other times it's just like getting that last bit done before an important presentation. So we've talked a little bit about that. Sorry, my allergies are really bad this morning, so hopefully you guys will all be a little generous with my throat clearing from time to time. Then the other thing that I talked about was the fact that I've been married for 26 years. So that is a huge accomplishment, like I said earlier. And let's just go with, this may be something for another podcast, but all of you know that in today's developing countries, to be married for 26 years is quite an accomplishment. My husband and I started dating when, I'm going to tell you the honest truth, I was 16, just like literally just turned 16. And we got married when I was 20, and beat the odds from getting married as a young couple. And we've been married for 26 years, and it's great. Not always great. We've non-great times, just like anything in our life. However, all those investments, all that time that you put into each other is so worth it, because I can't even imagine doing life starting all over with no one, or starting off with doing this with someone new again. And I do know that this isn't true for everybody. And so for those of you who haven't been able to do this, or this isn't part of your life story, definitely there are different ways to do life. And I feel for you if this is something that you've longed for in your heart. So I don't in any way want to be unempathetic, because I am empathetic, but I also want to celebrate when things do go well. So that's part of what this says. All right, so then we're going to go on to the next point. So the second one is to pursue the present with all of your head, heart, and hands. And what I wrote to him was this kind of ending with that section is, even if you're being a mom or a dad when the kids need you, it could be serving a 70-year-old grieving widow who's trying to make sense of her financial affairs after her late husband used to manage them, and she herself has zero experience. Or teaching English to others so they can expand their work opportunities and live a more fulfilling life. So where I'm going with that is pursue your present with all your head, heart, and hands. I feel it's worthy to say twice, because it's kind of been my motto, like live in the present, seize opportunities. So many of us live in our past, and we repeat the past a lot. And if you repeat the past, it just becomes part of your present. And so if you want to do more in your life, you have to add more experiences. You can't re-experience old ones as new. I mean, they're not really that new then. So I always like just live in the present. And so, yeah, sometimes that does mean when your kids need you that you're just there. You kind of drop everything else or set it over a little bit so that you can spend some time with them. There are many times in my parenting career, if you want to call it that I was so tired. It was, had a long day, pushed really hard in the office that day. And then it's 11 o'clock at night and I'm ready to call her in. And one of my kids comes in and they have this look on their face, like they really want to talk. And they just start chatting up about nothing to start with. That's usually how it goes. Just kind of feeling the waters there, see if you're willing to listen. And then as time goes, I realize they just really need to talk. That's mostly when teenagers like to talk, is really late at night. And I remember thinking, okay, these are defining mommy moments. I need to listen right now. It's not about how tired I am and I need to just like pull myself together for just a bit extra. And these have paid for themselves. So how could I do so much? Like, honestly, if your kids are healthy and well and they feel listened to, then they're doing well. And there's a lot of layers to that. Something that kind of comes to mind with that is that, I don't have to worry about them as much. They're going to take up less of my brain drag, if you will, because I'm not going to be worried about them. They're going to come to me when they need help. And I'm going to feel like they're just doing fairly well. And if they are sharing something that's going on tough in their life, then I feel like it's something I know what to put my finger on instead of trying to guess what's going on. And the other thing too is that, like, as they've grown older, I mean, this has really helped because we run a farm and all of them pitch in. There's times when things don't go well on the farm and there's tempers kind of go, and they're there to be like, hey, let's handle the situation. Let's get through it. Let's make the best of the situation. And they handle it like adults. And they don't shirk talking about difficult things, even when they're tired and they've been running really long hours. And in a selfish way, it's allowed me a lot more space to develop some of my own interests, because guess what? We have a good relationship, and guess what? They cook, they help their dad on the farm, they pick up groceries. Their lives, they're well adjusted in life and they're doing fairly well, I think. And so it has opened up a lot of space for me to be able to develop my own and have them like pitch in things that I normally would do. So obviously giving me more time, but not just time, but energy and mind energy, mind space to develop some of my own interests. So, and then I also made this reference to the grieving widow. When I was a tax expert, it's super heartbreaking when you have some clients for many years and one of them passes away. You try to prepare for that, but it hurts. And afterwards, I get the widow in, and the widow comes in, and usually, traditionally, especially when I was doing taxes back then, the male took lead in the finances, and usually the male is older, and so they usually pass away first. And so most often I had a female widow in my office with very little financial affairs, and like not even knowing where everything is, like what to cancel, what to change their name to, which offices they need to notify. And I mean, that's probably a podcast in itself, just what I would encounter and how I could maybe help some of you to think about how to help the spouse you leave behind, so this isn't such a difficult time with them. But I loved being able to just step into that moment when they're going through a tough time. It's very vulnerable when finances are coming out, and they're vulnerable. And so it's something that I did. I just lived with my heart. So I was using my head for them, but I was really, really, really using my heart for them. And how does this play into success? I don't know. It's not necessarily that I was successful doing it or made a ton of money on it, because I didn't. it was satisfaction. And I think that success comes from satisfaction about life and satisfaction that you're making a meaningful difference. And so it's not all measured in how many businesses you have, or whether or not you're someone like me who came from a welfare kid and is far from that now. And those are easy successes, but I don't know. I think just being okay with who you are and happy with what kind of person you turned out to be is success. And then, what goes with that is, again, when you put everything into the present and you put into your family and you put into your partner and you live with your head, your heart, and I'm going to say hands. So a dream of mine was always to travel abroad and do some short-term projects. I don't know if I'd call them projects. I'm not sure what to call them, but we'll use it for now. And so something that I did a couple years ago was I took my 16-year-old daughter to Costa Rica. She homeschooled for that semester. And what we did is we went to learn how to teach English there. And we did that for a whole month. We took our teaching English as a second language certification. And then we also volunteer taught for a month. And you're going to wonder, like, how was I able to do this when we're running this farm at home, when I'm running these other businesses? And in this particular case, we were able to fit it in right after the harvest season. And because I have a good relationship with my daughter, she's able to handle a lot of her own life, especially with school. This is something we could do. Because I had invested in these relationships, I was able to pursue an interest of mine. And what I love about this is that English is a trade language, and we're not going there to be saviors necessarily. I think that what we need to remind ourselves is that it expands their work opportunities. So when a foreigner has English, they can choose what kind of jobs they have. So, and it usually improves those opportunities. Doesn't always mean they're going to make more money. Maybe they don't want to, but it means they get to choose what kind of job they have. And I've heard some really great stories from people who got to do something they loved simply because they had picked up some English. So that's fulfilling to me. I'm helping somebody else live a better life. I was able to fit it into this 2 months. And now during COVID, I look back and I see these pictures on my Facebook of this time when I was in Costa Rica with my daughter and we were bonding, and the relationships we developed there. Oh my gosh. So like, to be able to fit that into your life, be able to travel abroad and spend 2 months living in a foreign country, learning a language, learning a culture, and just connecting with people, I consider that a success. And then we're going to go on to the next one. And that is to live life like you have an expiry date of the age of 60. That's right. Yeah, you heard me correctly. So I'm going to refer back to being a tax expert simply because my friend that reached out to me is from the financial background, and that's just what's coming out today. And what I'd like to kind of highlight there is what I learned through clients. In my walk of life, I've had the privilege to meet a lot of people, especially when I had my tax consultancy. And when I first started out, my first few years, I was located in an office which mostly had seniors as their clients, and I was able to learn a lot. And so right across from me, you could ask them anything, and I did. They were so fascinating to me. What I love about them is how honest they'll be about, what they would tell someone younger who's asking. And this was back before internet was really big. So we weren't able to have these growth mindset groups from Facebook where we can ask, say, if you were to ask tell your younger self something, what would it be? Because it's so fascinating to hear what people will say. And so I would ask these seniors time and time again, what did you do right? What would you change if you could? And something that I learned is this life advice that I'm talking about here. And this life advice is to live your life. You have an expiry date of 60. And what I often saw was that once someone hits around the age of 60, there was often huge health ailments that came with it, or limitations. And so what they would tell me is, you say you're going to wait till you retire to do all these great things. However, in reality, you're confronted with the reality that you can't get the time back or the energy or the passion that you had when you were young and able. You think you're going to have more money when you're retired, but that's often not true. So your income is somewhat more limited in many ways. And something that was kind of sad to me is I always wanted to travel when I was young. And I heard that story quite a bit with seniors. Is one of them wanted to travel back to their homeland or to the ancestral home. And they'd be like, that's something we'll do when they retire. And when they retired, there was quite a few things that could happen. One would be potentially they didn't have the finances to do that. Often it was the health, and not of necessarily them, the one who wanted to travel. It was often the health of one of the spouses that restricted the other one from traveling. And so the one who kind of just kept saying, no, let's wait till we retire, felt really bad for not doing this when they were younger and able. And, and if they would have done it when they were younger and able, they would have had those connections with their relatives abroad. Whereas when you're in your 60s, a lot of those connections they're not as strong as they would have been, and your interest isn't necessarily the same. And so they missed out on a lifetime of being able to grow these connections that they would have grown if they were younger. So that was one of the things that kind of come out of like what to do if you what you want to do when you're young. So travel was one. If you have an interest or a hobby that you would like to pursue, and I mean, it's not rocket science to know that like arthritis can set in. So those hobbies that you wanted to try, if they were to do with hands, you would be quite restricted in being able to do something that would require some fineness and some fine motor skills. And also the other thing too is, and this is okay, but when you get to your 60s, often you become grandparents. And so your time just gets taken with other interests, and you love your grandchildren. However, you have less energy to go around. And so when you have your grandchildren, if you're still working, again, there's not any time to pursue your interests. So if this is something that's really important to you and there are things in your life that you want to try or accomplish, I definitely recommend living like you have an expiry date. And if you make it past 60, that's just like a bonus. And if you're doing well when you're up to 60, that's a bonus. So you can bonus live in those years, which I'm really hoping to do myself. However, don't wait. I mean, I'm not saying you have to wait till just before you're 60, but don't wait to do those things you really want to do. If you really want to do them, then you have to ask yourself, is this like something, how did I used to say this when I was mentoring? Is this just wishful thinking, or is it a value? So you wishfully think you could travel, or is this a true value? So if it's a true value to travel, like it was in my case, then I need to live like I have an expiry date. And earlier I shared with you about my health issues. And so if I wouldn't have got some of this back, I maybe never would have been able to travel. And I had traveled a bit up to that age, but at the age of 35, I didn't think I was ever going to be able to travel again. In fact, we thought maybe I was going to die and I wasn't going to live much longer. And then my husband and I wouldn't have been able to travel again. So live life like you have an expiry date of 60. And I promise you that you will be, when you hit that age, you'll be happy that you did. And for any of you who need a little more urging, think about the COVID crisis, because I was recently talking to a friend of mine who'd spent 10 years saving for elaborate cruise for her and her husband. They always wanted to go on one. They had it booked in April, and 10 years they've been waiting to go on this cruise. And guess what happened? COVID hit, and they had to cancel their cruise. And they're in their 60s, and they are not going to be able, they're going to maybe be able to go on this cruise, but it doesn't look like anytime soon. And so my heart broke for them. I mean, this was a big dream of theirs. It's something they spent a lot of time on. They did everything right. They saved for it, didn't go when they couldn't afford it. But what I would recommend is to think about this differently. What if they would have went on a smaller cruise that cost less in their earlier years, and then they wouldn't be able to go on this cruise? So that's what I'd recommend. Go with what you can afford. Obviously, you shouldn't go into debt to go on a cruise, but they probably could have went on a much smaller, lower scale one at the 5-year mark or the 6-year mark. And if anything, I'd like to pass that on to you so you can take those words of their regret and kind of like what I want to talk about in my show is just like learning from others, learning from my past, using the hindsight so that forward we can have foresight. Hey, I like the way that sounds. Transforming hindsight into foresight. Might have to patent or copyright that one. Anyway, so I'm going to think about that one a little more. You all got that one here first. That's kind of how things go when you talk off the cuff. And we've covered all three that I covered in my email. Now, just to remind you, I did not write all of that in my email to him or my messages through LinkedIn. I wrote just little small bits, and then during a follow-up conversation, we've unpacked parts of those where he asked me more about each of them. So for those of you who have stuck around this long, you get a bonus life advice tip. I didn't include this at the beginning, so I'm going to pass it on right here. I did actually include this as an add-on to my LinkedIn messaging. And here it is. Bonus tip number 4. Make really good money in 1 or 2 areas so you can dabble in other interests for fun. So full disclosure, one of my businesses makes pretty good money sometimes. But usually it's enough that we can coast off of it for a year if it's not good the next year. That's how farming is. Sometimes we have a really good year when it rains, and the next year during drought, then we kind of have to use the money from the rainy year for the drought year. So there are times when we do really well that I'm able to kind of do some extra adventures. And because that business can do well, then it's allowed me to do other things. So like at the age of 40, I know I shouldn't tell you how old I am. I'm older than 40. However, it allowed me to start a master's program at the age of 40, volunteer in developing countries for months at a time. And I was being a little cheeky that day when I shared this with him, I guess moonlight as a photographer. And so what I mean by making really good money in 1 or 2 areas is farming, and then also I had my additional income of tax consulting. We were able to put money away for travel because that's really important to me, but also for these other interests like doing my master's. And then when I talked about moonlighting as photography, especially when you're in SLRs, is not inexpensive. Now our phones are pretty awesome, but 15, 20 years ago, those SLR digital cameras were a serious penny. They still are actually. And if you want a really great lens, they are that way too. So I was able to pursue those passions because I kind of focused on making sure that we did well in a couple of areas. Now, there are times when I made no money at my interests. So like, for example, when I did my master's, I didn't do it for job promotion. I've still not been paid in any way for anything that I've learned. When I did my master's, I do teach sometimes. And in those cases, when I used what I learned in my master's, I did all volunteer. And so, but I was able to do that because I had a couple of good solid businesses. So remember, I'm giving this advice to someone who's got a couple of businesses and can probably in his case, put some of it on passive mode. Mine wasn't really that way. And so my advice to him is to kind of get those going, grow those, and then you have time to do those other things. Like what I was talking about earlier with teaching English, we paid to go down there. So in my daughter's case, she was going to what we call like an alternate school. So the building is owned privately, but the education itself is public. And so we did have to pay for the school usage fee is what they call it. And so for the semester that she wasn't in this school, I took the money from that and then applied it towards our costs for when we went down to learn how to teach English. And what I didn't share with you earlier is what I was teaching my daughter was something that I hope is valuable to her, is she was thinking about going in to be a teacher. And she was about 15 or 16, and she's amazing with kids, to be honest. She saw her in the Sunday school. She's done a lot of volunteering with teaching, and I thought this was something she's really suited to. Although she wasn't sure she wanted to do it and didn't feel like that was maybe her calling. However, my husband and I talked about it, and we thought it would be good for her to try it out before you go one, go into a 5-year degree to become a teacher and find out you don't love it, or two, not go and do teaching and find out later that you should have done teaching because that's really what you're called to do. So often we learn just as much by what not to do than what to do. So when we went to Costa Rica to teach, some of it was self-motivated or self-interest, because it was just a way for her to try to see if she wanted to teach I mean, it's way less money to go and live in a foreign country for 2 months than it is for her to spend 5 years in university and find out it's not something she wants to do. And that's kind of how we looked at the investment there. It didn't cost us a lot to go there. It's pretty reasonable, to be honest. Living in a developing country is not near like living in our local country. And the cost of food is less than at home. So when you take your residence fee, your residence cost for rent when you're there, that's pretty much your most expensive thing that would cost you more than it would at home. And anyway, so just because I have you and it's bonus material, I want to tell you how amazing it was when we were teaching English. The monetary cost of it, or loss of cost, like I guess I could have been developing my business at the time, far outweighs. So like for me, experience is really important. Like probably one of the top things on my list of like what's important in my life is experience. I don't really care that much about the money, as long as I don't have to worry about like if I need new tires and they're bald and it's winter time. That was a serious problem when I was younger. But when I lived in Costa Rica, no joke, we lived right next to the ocean for 2 months, and 1 month of it we lived like literally just a few feet from the ocean. And while we were preparing lessons, I mean, it's smoking hot and you're sitting at the tables, but you've got the breeze of the ocean. And then these monkeys would seriously, like monkeys lived around the hostel that we were living in. And they would climb all over the tables and into the rafters. And so we're like living the dream life. We're volunteering, spending our own time and energy, investment and money, but we're getting the experience of a lifetime. So like, oh my gosh, we did things like turtle releases. I saw hundreds of turtles come out of the ocean, or sort of stroll into the ocean after coming out of a hole. That's a whole, we should share a video of that sometime. And the other thing that came out of that is that probably the coolest thing for me, one of the coolest things, is we live in hostels with 18 to 30-year-olds from all over the world. Okay, so like in a hostel, people are backpacking in. Where we were teaching was an out of the way spot where it's not really a high touristy area. So the people who are coming in, there's kind of an extra down to earthness of them. They're looking for the real Costa Rica, not the tourist tamarindo that you're going to get there, which isn't what locals think isn't really Costa Rica. It's more like tourist town. And man, it was so fascinating sitting at the tables. You want to talk about education? You want to talk about experience? Like for 2 months, like what our hostel had is like a banquet table where everybody eats together, they cook together. The only thing that is private is your room, and not everybody even has private rooms. Bathrooms are shared, all the other facilities are shared. And what happened at that table was just magical, to be honest. World education. In many ways, we got to hear the hearts of the young, of the next generation. I got to see a little bit of what I think the future is going to be. They talked about the future. They talked about ideas. I mean, just the fact that they're all internationals, completely different perspectives. The Germans especially were very bold. And my podcast is called Bold Perspectives, and I have a really strong German heritage. And so I really appreciated their directness. And oh my gosh, some of the questions they just straight up just ask you, you're like, oh yeah, I forgot. This is okay to just like straight up ask a question. And some of them asked me about my parenting techniques. Some of them were challenging me on my parenting techniques. But we got to have open conversations. Oh my gosh, like I would do it again in a heartbeat. Doesn't matter that you're like, it's pretty much glorified camping in a hostel, to be honest. And it was probably a very magical experience for both myself and my daughter. And so you got the bonus section. Hopefully in the future podcast, I'll talk a little bit more about my experience in Costa Rica and share with you some of the table talk from these 18 to 19-year-olds. I look forward to sharing some of these stories with you and love to hear how some of them resonated with you. in your life moving forward, or any of these kind of like aha moments and what spoke to you. That's it for our show today. I thank you for tuning in again, and I hope that you love it enough that you're going to hit the subscribe button so you can hear more later, and that we stay connected. I thank you again for coming today. It was so great to be with you. I'm Samantha Postman, and this is Bold Perspectives Podcast.
Thanks for listening to Bold Perspectives with Samantha Postman. We'd love to hear which insights added value to your life or the lives of others. To help support the podcast, please share the love on social media, leave a rating or a review. If you don't want to miss out on exclusive content, sign up for her personal email letters. Check out Samantha's website at samanthapostman.com. Follow her on YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Instagram. Thanks for your amazing support. We'll see you again. And remember, you are meant to live a better and bolder life.